The night my father erased me from his life, he did it standing under a crystal chandelier, holding a glass of champagne, like it was just another announcement. 30 people were watching when he looked at me and said, "If you walk out that door to join the army, you are no longer my daughter." No one spoke. Not my mother. Not my sister. They just sat there, pretending this was normal. And I remember thinking, this wasn't even the worst part. If this story speaks to your heart, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with you. And I'd love to know where you're watching from, your city or country, and what time it is for you right now. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, a commissioned officer in the United States Army. And this is the night my family decided I didn't exist anymore. It started 3 years earlier, in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White columns. Long driveway. The kind of place people slow down to admire when they drive past. Inside, everything was controlled. Structured. My father, Richard Carter, ran Carter Logistics, a multimillion-dollar supply chain company he built from the ground up. He liked to say he created everything we had. And because of that, he believed he owned everything too. Including me. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in our house. My younger sister Sophie and me. Sophie was easy. She smiled at the right moments, said yes to everything, and followed every plan my father laid out for her. Business school. Internship at Carter Logistics. Engagement to a man my parents approved of before she even graduated. She was the future of the family. I was the problem. I didn't rebel. I didn't sneak out or break rules. I just didn't fit the version of me my father had already decided on. While Sophie sat in boardrooms learning how to run the company, I spent my time volunteering at a local veterans center, listening to stories most people avoided. Men and women who had served, sacrificed, and come back to a world that barely noticed them. I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between those quiet conversations and the weight of their stories, I made a decision. I was going to enlist. I didn't tell my family right away. Not 'cause I was afraid. I just knew. I knew what it would turn into. The night I finally said it out loud, we were sitting at the long dining table, the one my father reserved for important discussions. My mother had lit candles. Sophie was talking about a new contract she'd helped close. My father was proud. You could hear it in the way he nodded, the way he leaned back in his chair like everything was exactly as it should be. And then he looked at me. "Emily," he said, "we need to talk about your position in the company." I remember folding my hands in my lap. "I won't be taking a position," I said. He didn't react at first. Just stared at me, waiting for the rest. "I've already signed my enlistment papers. I'm joining the army." The silence that followed felt heavy. Not shocked. Not confused. Just heavy. Like something had just cracked, and everyone could hear it. Sophie stopped mid-sentence. My mother's hand froze around her wine glass. My father didn't raise his voice. That was never his style. He just leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto mine like he was studying a problem he needed to solve. "You're not serious." "I am." He shook his head once, slow. "No. You're confused. This is a phase. You'll reconsider." "I've already signed," I said. "Training starts in 8 weeks." That's when something changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. He set his glass down on the table with a soft click. "Do you understand what you're throwing away?" he asked. "Everything I've built. Everything this family stands for." I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I did understand. I just didn't agree. "I understand," I said quietly. "But this is what I want." My mother finally spoke, her voice careful. "Emily, sweetheart, there are other ways to serve. You don't have to do something so extreme." I looked at her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophie shifted in her seat, uncomfortable but silent. And my father smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't proud. It was the kind of smile you give when you've already made a decision. "Then let me make something clear," he said. "If you walk out that door to join the army, you walk out of this family." I felt it land. Not like a shock. More like something settling into place. You won't have access to any family accounts. Any assets. Your name will be removed from all future business considerations. He paused, letting each word sit. And you will not come back here expecting anything. I remember looking around the table. 30,000 square feet of house. Polished floors. Expensive silence. My mother still staring at her glass. Sophie looking down at her phone like she didn't want to be part of it. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't losing them. They had already decided I didn't belong. I stood up slowly. No yelling. No crying. I just pushed my chair back and picked up my bag. Okay, I said. My father nodded once, satisfied. Good, he said. Then we understand each other. I walked toward the front door. Every step louder than it should have been. My hand paused on the handle for half a second. Not because I was hesitating. Just because I knew once I opened it there was no version of this where I came back as the same person. I didn't look back. I just opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. And behind me the door closed. Clean. Final. Like it had never been open at all. I didn't know it then. But that was the moment my father lost control over everything. And years later he would need me more than he ever thought possible. I slept in a borrowed bed that first night. Not a hotel. Not a place I chose. Just a narrow twin mattress in a spare room at a friend's apartment 20 minutes from my parents' house. The sheets smelled like laundry detergent I did not recognize, and the ceiling fan clicked every few seconds like it was counting something down. I lay there staring at the ceiling, fully awake, replaying the sound of that door closing behind me. I did not cry. I thought I would. Anyone would. But I did not. I just felt quiet, like something had been turned off inside me. The next morning I checked my phone out of habit. No messages. Not from my mother. Not from Sophie. Not even a missed call. It was like I had already disappeared. But that was not the worst part. By the end of that week my bank account had been locked. Every shared account my father had ever added me to was gone. My credit card stopped working at a gas station on Route 6. I remember standing there holding the card, swiping it again like maybe it was a mistake. The cashier did not even look at me. Declined, she said like it was nothing. I had one debit card left. My personal account. $3,240. That was everything I had. 8 weeks until training. I did the math in my head while sitting in my car. Rent, food, gas, uniform deposits. There was no safety net. Not anymore. I did not call home. Not once. Because I already knew how that conversation would go. I would say I needed help. And my father would remind me that I made my choice. So I adjusted. I found a small studio apartment on the edge of town. 400 square feet. One window facing a brick wall. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's footsteps through the ceiling. It was not much. But it was mine. I bought second-hand furniture. A small table. A chair. A mattress that came rolled up in a box. I kept everything simple. Everything controlled. Because for the first time in my life there was no one else deciding what my life should look like. The days moved fast after that. Paperwork. Medical checks. Final processing. Every step bringing me closer to a version of myself my family would not recognize. And then the day came. I stood in line with a group of strangers at the military entrance processing station, holding a folder with my name on it, waiting to sign the final documents. I remember looking around the room. Different ages. Different backgrounds. People who had reasons I would never fully understand. But we all had one thing in common. We were choosing something difficult. On purpose. When it was my turn, the officer looked at me, then at my paperwork. Any dependents? He asked. No, I said. Any financial support from family? No, he nodded, stamped the page and slid it back toward me. Sign here. My hand did not shake. I signed my name in a straight line, clear and steady. Emily Carter. Just like that, it was official. No going back. The first few weeks of training were exactly what you would expect. Early mornings. Long days. Orders, structure, repetition. It stripped everything down to the basics. Who you are. What you can handle. What you cannot. I did not stand out. I was not the fastest. Not the strongest. But I did not quit. Not once. Even on the days when my muscles felt like they were made of sand and my thoughts kept drifting back to that dining room table. That moment. That sentence. You are no longer my daughter. It stayed with me longer than I expected. Not as pain. Not exactly. More like a question I had not answered yet. If I was not his daughter, then who was I? Weeks turned into months. Months into years. I adapted. Promoted. Learned how to lead, not by control but by example. I learned how to listen. How to make decisions when there was no perfect option. How to stand in a room where no one knew my last name and earn respect anyway. And slowly something shifted. I stopped checking my phone in the mornings. I stopped wondering if someone would reach out. Because they did not. Birthdays passed. Holidays passed. Silence became normal. And in that silence I built something new. A life that did not depend on approval. A version of myself that did not need to be chosen to exist. They thought I disappeared. They thought I walked away and faded into something smaller. But they were wrong. I was becoming something they could not control anymore. And far away from everything they were holding together so tightly, things were already starting to fall apart. I just did not know it yet. I was standing on the training field at 0600 when everything shifted. But at the time, it felt like just another morning. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs, and the ground was still damp from overnight rain. We were halfway through a field exercise, the kind where time stretches and every decision matters. My uniform was covered in dust, my boots heavy, my focus locked in. I had learned to live like that. Present. Controlled. Unshaken. That version of me did not check the past anymore. That version of me did not expect anything from anyone. But that morning, something small broke the pattern. My commanding officer called my name. Not loud. Not urgent. Just enough to pull me out of formation. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, holding a clipboard in one hand. "You have a message waiting at base. Civilian contact." I remember blinking just once. Civilian contact. That was not normal. Not for me. I nodded. "Understood, sir." He studied me for half a second longer than usual, like he was deciding whether to say more. Then he handed me the slip of paper. They said it was important. I looked down. A name. A law firm. No explanation. No context. Just a number and a note that said they would be waiting. And for the first time in years I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not exactly. More like a crack in the structure I had built. But that was not the worst part. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe paperwork. Maybe some administrative issue I had overlooked. Something small. Something irrelevant. That was what I wanted it to be. But deep down something else was already forming. Something I did not want to name yet. I finished the exercise without asking questions. Without letting it show. That was something the Army had taught me well. You do not react until you have all the information. You stay steady. Always. When I got back to base, I went straight to the administrative office. The building was quiet, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Everything clean and controlled. A receptionist looked up as I walked in. "Lieutenant Carter?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded toward a closed door down the hall. "They are waiting for you." They. Not one person. Not a phone call. Someone had come here. In person. I walked down the hallway slowly, each step measured. My hand rested on the door handle for just a second longer than necessary. Then I opened it. There was a man sitting at the table. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Gray suit. Leather briefcase. The kind of presence that felt deliberate. He stood when I entered. "Lieutenant Emily Carter," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." I shook it. Firm. Controlled. "Who are you?" He smiled slightly, professional but careful. "My name is Thomas Caldwell. I represent Carter Logistics." The name landed before I could stop it. Carter Logistics. My father's company. I did not react. Not outwardly. I just pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "I have not been associated with that company for years," I said. My voice was steady. "Then why are you here?" He studied me for a moment like he was measuring how much I already knew. Then he opened his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. "Because," he said quietly, "they are about to lose everything." I did not reach for the folder right away. I just looked at it. A simple manila file. Clean. Ordinary. But it felt heavier than anything I had carried in years. "Explain," I said. He nodded as if he expected that. Over the past 18 months, Carter Logistics has taken on a series of high-risk expansions, aggressive acquisitions, leveraged financing. It worked at first. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But the last quarter changed everything. Contracts fell through. Investors pulled back. Cash flow tightened. And now, he tapped the folder lightly. They are facing a full structural collapse. I listened. No interruption. No reaction. Just facts. That was how I had learned to process information. But inside something else was moving. Not panic. Not anger. Something colder. Something clearer. And this involves me how? I asked. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Because despite what you were told, you are still listed in the original ownership structure. That made me look up. Just slightly. That is not possible, I said. I was removed. He shook his head. No, Lieutenant. You were intended to be removed, but certain documents were never fully executed. Your name remains attached to a controlling portion of the company's legal framework. The room felt smaller. Not physically, just tighter. Like the air had shifted. So what are you saying? I asked. He met my eyes directly now. No hesitation. I am saying that without your authorization, without your signature, the company cannot restructure. It cannot secure emergency funding. It cannot survive. He let that sit there. No pressure. No urgency in his tone. Just the weight of the truth. Your father knows this? I asked. A brief pause. Then a small careful answer. He does now. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting calmly on the table. On the outside, nothing had changed. Same posture. Same control. But inside something shifted. The same man who stood in front of 30 people and erased me from his life, was now standing on the edge of losing everything he built. And the only person who could stop it was me. I looked at the folder again, then back at the man in front of me. Why did he not come himself? I asked. Thomas Caldwell did not smile this time. Because, he said quietly, he is not the one who gets to ask anymore. I did not touch the folder for a full 10 seconds after he finished speaking. I just sat there, looking at it, like if I waited long enough it would turn into something else. Something smaller. Something that did not carry my last name. But it did not change. It stayed exactly where he placed it, quiet and heavy on the table between us. Open it, Thomas said, not as a command, just as a fact. So I did. Inside were documents, contracts, ownership charts, legal structures that stretched back years. I flipped through them slowly, page by page, my eyes scanning for something that would prove him wrong. Something that would confirm what my father told me that night. That I had been removed. That I no longer existed in his world. But the truth was there in black and white. My name. Emily Carter. Not as a footnote. Not as a placeholder. As a controlling interest holder in a section of the company that governed final authorization rights. I stopped on one page, my finger resting on a line that had been highlighted. Irrevocable governance clause. I read it once. Then again. It was not complicated. It was deliberate. Whoever set this up made sure it could not be undone easily. Who drafted this? I asked without looking up. Thomas did not hesitate. Your grandfather. That made me pause. My grandfather had died years before I left. He was not loud like my father. Not controlling. But he was precise. Careful. The kind of man who built things quietly and made sure they lasted. He created a safeguard, Thomas continued. A structure that prevented full control from being concentrated in one person. Including your father. I leaned back slightly, the paper still in my hand. And my father never removed it? He tried, Thomas said. But the clause required multiple signatures. Including yours. A small silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable. Just clear. So he thought he could erase me, I said slowly. Without actually removing me. Thomas gave a slight nod. That appears to be the case. I let out a breath. I did not realize I was holding. Not frustration. Not anger. Just clarity. For years I thought I had been cut out completely. That everything tied to that life had been severed clean. But it had not. Something had remained. Something my father either overlooked or underestimated. What exactly do they need? I asked. Thomas closed the folder gently and folded his hands on top of it. They need your authorization to restructure the company. Without it, creditors will move in. Assets will be frozen. Within 90 days, Carter Logistics will cease to exist. 90 days. I repeated it in my head. 3 months. That was all it would take for everything my father built to collapse. The same empire he chose over me. The same company he believed defined our entire family. Gone. I did not feel satisfaction. I thought I might. I thought there would be something like balance. But there was nothing. Just stillness. And what happens if I say no? I asked. Thomas met my eyes. Then it ends. Simple. Direct. No drama. No pressure. Just truth. I nodded once, absorbing it. And my father? I asked. Thomas hesitated for the first time. Just a fraction of a second. He loses everything, he said. I looked down at my hands resting on the table. Steady. Unmoved. The same hands that signed my enlistment papers. The same hands that built a life without them. Now holding something they could not take back. Does he know you are here? I asked. Yes. And he sent you? Yes. Another pause. He asked me to explain the situation, to present the documents, and to request your cooperation. Request. That word sat differently than I expected. Not demand. Not order. Request. I leaned back in my chair, my posture relaxed, my voice calm. That is not how he speaks. Thomas allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. No, he said. It is not. The room felt quiet again. Not tense. Just balanced. Like everything had shifted into a place where nothing could be forced anymore. I want to see everything, I said. Full financials. Contracts. Liabilities. I am not signing anything based on a summary. Thomas nodded immediately. Of course. I anticipated that. I have additional documents prepared. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second, thicker file, placing it carefully beside the first. Take your time, he said. There is no immediate deadline today. But time is not on their side. I finished for him. He gave a small nod. I closed the first folder and placed my hand on top of both stacks of paper. For a moment I just sat there, feeling the weight of it. Not just the documents. The choice. Years ago, my father made his decision in front of a room full of people. Clean. Final. No hesitation. Now it was my turn. And the difference was, I was not going to rush it. I stood up slowly, gathering the files. I will review everything, I said. And I will let you know when I am ready to respond. Thomas stood as well. That is all we can ask. I turned toward the door, then paused for just a second. Not because I needed to, just because something crossed my mind. One more thing, I said without looking back. If he wants an answer. I let the sentence hang there for a moment, then finished it. He can come ask me himself. I did not wait for a response. I just opened the door and walked out. And for the first time in years, the power in this story had completely changed hands. I did not open the second folder right away. I carried both files back to my quarters and set them down on the small metal desk near the window, the same desk where I usually kept training schedules and field reports. For a long time I just stood there looking at them. The light coming through the window was flat and gray. The kind that made everything feel quieter than it really was. Outside I could hear distant movement on base. Orders being called. Boots on pavement. Life continuing exactly as it should. Inside that room everything felt different. Not heavier. Just sharper. Like the edges of things had come into focus. I sat down slowly and opened the thicker file. Page after page. Numbers. Contracts. Timelines. It did not take long to see the pattern. Expansion deals that looked strong on the surface but were built on borrowed stability. Loans tied to projections that never fully materialized. Partnerships that depended on conditions that shifted too quickly. It was not one mistake. It was a series of decisions that stacked on top of each other until the structure could not hold anymore. And at the center of all of it was my father's signature. Over and over again. Approving. Authorizing. Committing. I read everything. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Just carefully. The way I had been trained to assess risk. Identify weaknesses. Understand consequences. Hours passed without me noticing. At some point, the light outside shifted from gray to gold, then slowly faded into evening. I did not stop, because the more I read, the clearer it became. This was not just a financial problem. This was control. My father had tried to grow the company faster than it could sustain itself. Tried to prove something. To someone. Maybe to the board. Maybe to the industry. Maybe to himself. And when things started to slip, he doubled down instead of stepping back. I closed the folder gently and leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. He built everything, I said quietly to myself, and then he risked all of it. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was not the collapse. It was what came after. I reached for the final section of documents, the ones labeled emergency restructuring proposals. That was where my name appeared again. Not just as a technical requirement. As a solution. There were clauses written specifically around my authorization. Conditions that only activated with my approval. It was not an accident. Someone had designed it this way. And I already knew who. My grandfather. He had not just created a safeguard. He had created a scenario. One where if everything went wrong, the one person my father tried to erase would be the only one who could fix it. I sat there in silence for a long moment, letting that settle. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just understanding. He saw it coming. Maybe not the exact details, but the possibility. And he made sure I would still have a place in the structure, even if no one else gave me one. I reached for my phone without thinking. Not to call. Just to hold it. The screen lit up. Still nothing. No missed calls. No messages. Not even now. Not even when everything was on the line. I set the phone back down slowly. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not about reconciliation. This was not about family. This was about survival. For them. Not for me. I stood up and walked to the window, my hands resting lightly on the frame. The bay stretched out in front of me, organized, steady, predictable. Everything had a system. A chain of command. Accountability. If something failed here, it was addressed directly. Not hidden. Not ignored. Not passed off as someone else's responsibility. That was the difference. I turned back toward the desk, my decision not fully formed yet, but closer than it had been before. I picked up the first folder again, flipping back to the ownership structure. My name sat there exactly where it had always been. Untouched. Unremoved. You missed something, I said quietly, as if my father could hear me from miles away. Not because he was careless, but because he was certain. Certain he had control. Certain I did not matter. That certainty was what failed him. I sat back down and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. Not official. Not legal. Just something simple. I started writing. Not a decision. Not yet. Just notes. Questions. Conditions. If I was going to be part of this, it would not be on their terms. It would not be rushed. And it would not be based on the version of me they left behind. Minutes turned into hours again. The list grew. Clear. Direct. No emotion. Just structure. The same way I had learned to lead. By the time I finished, the room was completely dark except for the desk lamp casting a small circle of light over the paper. I looked down at what I had written, then at the folders beside it. And for the first time since Thomas Caldwell walked into that room, I allowed myself to think one thing clearly. They needed me. Not the version of me they dismissed. Not the version they thought they could control. The person I had become without them. And this time, I was the one who would decide what happened next. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because my mind refused to slow down. Every detail I had read kept replaying in a different order, like my brain was testing scenarios, running outcomes, looking for weaknesses I might have missed. By 0500 I was already up, dressed, and sitting at my desk again. The list I wrote the night before was still there exactly where I left it. Clean. Precise. No emotion. Just conditions. I read through it once more, line by line, making small adjustments. Not softer. Just clearer. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this. Clarity is power. And I was not going to give that up. But that was not the hardest part. The hardest part was deciding when to respond. Not if. When. I could feel the pressure sitting just beneath the surface, even without anyone saying it out loud. 90 days. That clock had already started. Every hour I waited, the situation tightened on their side. But rushing would only benefit them, not me. So I did what I had been trained to do. I controlled the pace. 3 days passed before I contacted Thomas Caldwell. 3 days where I said nothing, did nothing, just continued my normal schedule like nothing had changed. Morning briefings, physical training, operational planning. On the outside I was exactly the same. On the inside I was measuring everything. On the third day I walked back into the same administrative building. Same hallway. Same closed door. He was already there when I entered, standing this time, like he had been expecting me at any moment. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, a small nod of acknowledgement. "Mr. Caldwell," I replied, setting both folders down on the table. I did not sit right away. I let the silence settle first. Then I took my seat, folding my hands in front of me. "I have reviewed everything," I said. He nodded once. "And?" I looked at him directly. "I understand the situation." He waited. Patient. Professional. "And I am willing to consider involvement," I continued. A small shift in his posture. Not relief. Just attention sharpening. Under conditions. That was where things changed. He did not interrupt. He did not try to guide the conversation. He just listened. I reached into my folder and pulled out the paper I had written. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just structured. "First," I said, my voice even. "Full transparency. I want access to all financial records, internal communications, and decision logs from the past 24 months. No redactions." He nodded, already anticipating something like this. "That is reasonable." "Second," I continued, "operational control during restructuring. Not advisory. Not symbolic. Actual decision-making authority within the scope of recovery." That made him pause. Just slightly. "That will be more complex," he said carefully. "Then it will not happen," I replied without raising my voice. The room went quiet again. Not tense. Just exact. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I will present that." "Third," I said, not waiting. "Independent oversight. I want an external firm auditing all restructuring actions. No internal-only decisions." Another nod. Slower this time. "Understood." I set the paper down on the table between us. "And finally," I said, my tone unchanged, "all communication goes through you. Not through my father. Not through anyone else in the family." That was the one that shifted something. Not visibly, but I could feel it. He exhaled quietly, almost like he expected it, but still needed a second to accept it. "May I ask why?" he said. I did not hesitate. "Because this is not a conversation," I said. "It is a negotiation." He nodded once. No argument. No pushback. Just acknowledgement. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting on the table. "Those are my conditions," I said. "If they are accepted, I will proceed to the next phase. If not, then this ends here." I let that sit there. No urgency. No pressure. Just the reality of the situation. He closed his briefcase slowly, placing my list inside with care. "I will deliver this personally," he said. "Good," I replied. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. He stood as well, but before I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Lieutenant Carter." I paused, looking back at him. "They were not expecting this," he said. Not critical. Not impressed. Just honest. I gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod. "Neither was I," I said. And then I walked out. Back into the hallway. Back into the structure I knew. But something had changed. Not around me. Inside me. For years I had lived with the absence of their voices. The silence. The space where family used to be. And I filled it with discipline. With purpose. With control. Now they were back. Not as family. As variables. As risk. as something that needed to be assessed and managed. And for the first time, I was not reacting to them. I was defining the terms. 3 days later my phone rang. Not an unknown number. Not a blocked line. A direct call. I looked at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then I answered. "This is Lieutenant Carter." There was a pause on the other end. A breath. Familiar. Controlled. And then I heard it. "Emily." My father's voice. For the first time in years. And somehow it sounded exactly the same. For a moment I did not say anything. I just held the phone to my ear, listening to the silence on the other end. It was not awkward. It was not emotional. It was measured. Like both of us were waiting to see who would move first. "Lieutenant Carter," I corrected calmly. There was a slight pause. Not long. Just enough to register. "Of course," he said. His tone adjusted immediately. Controlled. Professional. The same way he used to speak to executives in boardrooms. Not the way a father speaks to his daughter. "Lieutenant Carter." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the wall in front of me. "You have something to say," I replied. No greeting. No acknowledgement of time past. Just the point. He exhaled quietly. I could hear it through the line. "I received your conditions," he said. "And?" I asked. He did not answer right away. I could picture him, standing in his office, looking out at the city, calculating, adjusting, the same way he always did when something was not going according to plan. "They are extensive," he said carefully. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "They are necessary," I replied. Silence again. Longer this time. "You are asking for operational control," he said. "Temporary control," I corrected. "During restructuring. That is not a small request." "Neither is losing the company," I said. My voice did not change. Not louder. Not sharper. Just direct. Another pause. I could feel the shift happening. Not in the words. In the balance. 4 years, every conversation with him followed the same pattern. He spoke. I responded. He decided. I adjusted. That pattern was gone now. Completely. "You have to understand," he continued, his tone tightening just slightly. "There are stakeholders involved. Board members. Investors. This is not something that can simply be handed over." I let him finish. I did not interrupt. Then I answered. "And you have to understand," I said. "Without my authorization, there is nothing to hand over." The line went quiet again. Not tension. Just truth landing exactly where it needed to. "You are putting the company at risk," he said. I shook my head slightly even though he could not see it. "No," I replied. "I am defining the terms under which it can survive." There was a difference. And he knew it. I could hear it in the way his breathing changed. Slower. More deliberate. "This does not need to be adversarial," he said. I let that sit there for a second before answering. "It already is," I said. Not emotional. Not bitter. Just factual. Because it was. The moment he made that decision years ago, he set this in motion. This was just the result. "Emily," he said again, slipping back into the name this time without correction. "This is still your family." That was the first time something almost moved inside me. Not pain. Not anger. Just recognition. The word family. The way he said it. Like it still meant something the same way it used to. But it did not. Not anymore. "No," I said quietly. "This is your company." Another silence. This one heavier. Not because of emotion. Because of accuracy. "I am trying to fix this," he said. "Then fix it," I replied. "With the conditions I gave you." He exhaled again, sharper this time. "You are asking me to give up control of what I built." I looked down at my hand resting on the desk, steady, unmoving. "You already lost control," I said. "You just did not realize it yet." That was the moment everything shifted completely. I could feel it. Not in his words. In what he did not say. The absence of argument. The absence of authority. For the first time in my life, he did not have a response ready. "This is not how this was supposed to go," he said finally, his voice lower now. More honest. I nodded slightly to myself. No, I said. It is not. Because in his version of this story I would have come back smaller. Grateful. Willing to help. Willing to fit back into the role he had already defined for me. But that version of me did not exist anymore. You should have told me, he said after a moment. I frowned slightly. Told you what? About the clause, he said. About your position in the company. I let out a small breath. Not a laugh. Just disbelief. You should have removed me. I replied. If you wanted me gone. That landed harder than anything else I had said. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Long unbroken. And then for the first time since the call started, his voice changed. Not in tone. In weight. What do you want, Emily? He asked. Simple question. But it carried everything underneath it. Control. Resolution. Outcome. I thought about it for a second. Not because I did not know. Because I wanted to say it clearly. I want exactly what I wrote, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Another pause. Then finally, I will need time, he said. I nodded once. You have less than 90 days, I replied. He exhaled slowly. I will call you back. No, I said. That stopped him. You will have your answer delivered through Mr. Caldwell, I continued. That is how this works. A beat. Then, understood. The line went quiet for a second. Then the call ended. I lowered the phone and set it on the desk. My hand did not shake. My breathing did not change. Everything felt exactly the same. But it was not. Because for the first time in my life my father had asked me what I wanted. And this time, I had the answer. 3 days passed after that call. 3 days where nothing happened on the surface, but everything was moving underneath. I did not reach out. I did not follow up. I did not check my phone every hour waiting for an answer. I went back to my routine. Morning drills. Briefings. Reports. The same steady rhythm that had carried me through years without them. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this. Silence is not weakness. It is leverage. But that was not the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was the way his voice sounded at the end of that call. Not angry. Not commanding. Just uncertain. I had never heard that from him before. Not once in my life. On the 4th day, Thomas Caldwell returned. Same building. Same room. Same careful posture. But this time there was something different. Not urgency. Not panic. Just a shift in how he carried himself. Like he already knew the outcome before he walked in. I closed the door behind me and took my seat without saying anything. He placed a folder on the table, thinner than the last ones. They have reviewed your conditions, he said. I nodded once. And he did not open the folder right away. He looked at me first. Measuring. Not my reaction. My readiness. Then he spoke. They accept. The words were simple. But they landed with weight. Not excitement. Not relief. Just confirmation. I did not react immediately. I let the silence sit for a second the way I always did. Because acceptance was not the end. It was the beginning. All conditions? I asked. All conditions, he confirmed. Full transparency. Operational control during restructuring. Independent oversight. And communication through my office. I leaned back slightly, my eyes steady on his. No revisions? None that affect the structure you outlined, he said. I studied him for a moment. Not because I did not believe him. Because I wanted to understand what it cost them to say yes. Who pushed it through? I asked. He hesitated for half a second. Then answered. Your father did. That was unexpected. Not shocking. Just unexpected. The board resisted, he continued. Strongly. But he overruled them. I nodded slowly. That told me more than the documents ever could. He was out of options. Completely. I reached forward and pulled the folder closer, opening it carefully. Inside were revised agreements. Clean. Structured. Every condition reflected exactly as I had written it. No hidden language. No buried clauses. Just clear terms. I read through each page slowly. Not because I expected something to be wrong. Because I respected the process. Every line mattered. Every word had weight. When I finished, I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. When does this begin? I asked. Immediately upon your signature, Thomas replied. I nodded once. And the current state of the company? Deteriorating, he said plainly. Faster than projected. I looked down at the document again, then back at him. Then we do not delay. I reached for the pen he had placed beside the folder. For a brief second, I held it in my hand without moving. Not hesitation, just awareness. Years ago, I signed a different document that changed the direction of my life completely. This felt similar. Not because it connected me back to them, because it confirmed who I had become without them. I lowered the pen to the page and signed my name. Emily Carter. Clean. Steady. Final. I set the pen down and slid the folder back toward him. It is done, I said. He nodded, closing the folder carefully, almost like he understood the weight of what had just happened. There is one more thing, he said. I looked at him. Your father would like to meet. I did not answer right away. Not because I needed time, but as I wanted to be clear. That is not part of the agreement, I said. No, he admitted. It is not. Silence again. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Why? He considered it for a moment before answering. Because he does not understand you anymore, he said. I almost smiled at that. Not out of humor. Just recognition. He never did, I replied. Thomas nodded slightly, accepting that without argument. I stood up, straightening my uniform automatically. Tell him this, I said. If he wants to understand, he can watch what happens next. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of my boots steady against the floor. Outside, everything looked the same. Same buildings. Same structure. Same routine. But nothing was the same anymore. 'Cause now, I was not just part of the system. I was about to take control of one that had once tried to erase me. And this time there would be no mistakes. It has been 9 months since I signed those papers, and for the first time in a long time my life feels quiet in a way that does not hurt. Not empty. Not lonely. Just steady. The company did not collapse. Not because I saved it alone, but because I rebuilt it differently. Slower. More deliberate. Every decision documented. Every risk measured. The kind of structure my grandfather would have respected. I never moved back. I never returned to that house with the white columns or the long driveway. Some things do not need to be revisited to be understood. My father and I did meet once. Not in a boardroom. Not in front of anyone else. Just two people sitting across from each other with nothing left to prove. He looked older. Not weaker. Just aware. We did not talk about the past the way I thought we would. There were no apologies that fixed everything. No dramatic moment that made it all make sense. But there was something else. A kind of acknowledgement. Quiet. Unspoken. The kind that does not erase what happened but no longer controls what happens next. And that was enough for me. Because I finally understood something I did not know back then. You can love someone and still choose yourself. You can walk away from a place that hurt you and still build something meaningful without it. And you do not need permission to define your own worth. If you are listening to this and you have ever been made to feel like you were not enough, like you did not belong, like you had to shrink yourself to be accepted, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the version of yourself that someone else decided you were. You are the person you choose to become when you stop asking for approval and start building your own life. That does not happen all at once. It is quiet. It is slow. But it is real. And it is yours. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Truly. If any part of it felt familiar, if it reminded you of something you have lived through or are still working through, you are not alone in that. And I would really like to know, what is one moment in your life where you chose yourself, even when it was difficult? If this story speaks to your heart, you can like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter, I am 32 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this. Never let someone else's rejection define your value.